Deep inside your inner ear, you've got this incredible piece of biological engineering called the vestibular system. Now, this is basically our built-in gyroscope. It's the system that gives us our sense of balance and lets us know where we are in space by detecting every single tilt, turn, and movement of our head. So today, let's dive into how this amazing system actually works.
But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever really stopped to wonder why the world stays perfectly stable when you walk or run or even just turn your head? Why doesn't everything just look like a blurry, shaky cam video? The truth is, our body is solving this massive physics problem all the time, every single moment we're awake. And the answer, well, it lies deep inside our ears.
And that answer really comes in two parts. In this explainer, we're going to focus on the first part, how our body senses rotation, or what a physicist would call angular acceleration. We'll do that by exploring these remarkable structures called the semicircular canals. Now, the other half of the system, the part that handles straight-line motion and gravity, we'll save that for next time.
All right, so let's meet the hardware. The semicircular canals are, for all intents and purposes, the body's gyroscopes. You've got these three tiny fluid-filled tubes tucked away in your inner ear, and their entire job is to detect any and all rotational movement of your head. And the design is just brilliantly simple and incredibly effective. You have three canals, and each one is oriented at a right angle to the others. You can see how this covers all three planes of 3D space, right? The superior canal, that one handles the nodding yes motion. The posterior canal detects when you tilt your head to your shoulder. And the lateral, or horizontal canal, that one senses you shaking your head no. Any possible rotation you can make is just some combination of movements in these three planes.
Now, at the base of each of these canals, there's a little balloon-like bulge. It's called the ampulla. You can think of this as the main sensor hub. This is where the magic really happens. And inside the ampulla is the actual sensory organ, this tiny little ridge of cells called the crista ampullaris.
And sitting right on top of that ridge, completely sealing off the ampulla, is this gelatinous structure called the cupula. The best way to picture it is like a flexible, watertight, swinging door that goes from the floor to the ceiling. Fluid can't get past it, it can only push on it. And that little detail is the absolute key to how it all works.
Okay, so we've got the anatomy down. Three canals, each with an ampulla, and inside that, a cupula. So how does this structure actually sense you turning your head? Well, it all comes down to some pretty basic physics, fluid dynamics, and a little thing called inertia.
It's really just a beautiful little chain reaction. When you rotate your head, the bony canals move right along with it. But the fluid inside, it's called endolymph, has inertia. It tends to lag behind for just a split second. This lag creates a current that pushes against that gelatinous door, the cupula, and makes it bend. Now, embedded in the base of that cupula are tiny hair cells. And when the cupula bends, it bends the hair cells, and that triggers them to send a neural signal straight to the brain. And just like that, a physical motion becomes an electrical signal. You know, at the very heart of this entire mechanism is a fundamental law of physics, inertia. As our source material puts it here, it's the simple tendency of the fluid to kind of stay put while the canal moves around it that generates the whole signal. It's a perfect example of classical mechanics playing out on this microscopic scale right inside your head.
And here's another stroke of absolute design genius. The cupola has the exact same density as the fluid that it's sitting in. It's what we call neutrally buoyant, kind of like a scuba diver who's perfectly balanced in the water. What this means is that gravity has no effect on it. It's not going to bend just because you tilt your head and hold it there. This design feature perfectly isolates the semicircular canals to be pure rotation detectors, totally immune to gravity or linear movement.
But the system is even more clever than that. See, it doesn't just rely on one set of sensors. The canals on the left and right sides of your head work together as a perfectly matched pair. We call it a push-pull partnership, and it's what makes the system so incredibly precise. To really get this, you first need to know that the vestibular nerves are never actually silent. Even when you are perfectly still, they're sending out a constant signal, a resting firing rate of about 90 electrical spikes per second. This baseline is absolutely crucial because it lets the brain sense both increases and decreases in activity.
So how does this actually work? Well, imagine you turn your head to the right. In your right horizontal canal, that lagging fluid pushes on the cupula and excites its nerve, causing the firing rate to jump way above that 90 spikes per second baseline. At the exact same time, in your left canal, the fluid moves in the opposite direction. This inhibits its nerve, dropping the firing rate below 90. So one side gets pushed, the other gets pulled.
And this is the critical point. Your brain isn't just listening to the excited signal from your right ear. Instead, it's constantly comparing the signals from both ears. It computes the difference between the pushed right side and the pulled left side. This method, this differential coding, it cancels out any background noise and gives the brain an incredibly sensitive and precise measurement of exactly how fast and in what direction your head is turning.
Now, as we were going through the source material for this, we came across a pretty unusual piece of advice we just had to share. It literally said, and I quote, "Please like and subscribe for more custom medical videos made just for you." And interesting clinical pearl for sure. Anyway, with that said, let's move on to the big payoff.
So, why? Why does our body have this complex, high-precision gyroscope? What is the ultimate purpose of all this? Well, it's all to drive one of the most important and fastest reflexes we have, the vestibulo-ocular reflex, or VOR for short. The VOR is the answer to that question we asked at the very beginning. Its entire job is to take that head rotation signal from the semicircular canals and, in real time, tell your eye muscles to move your eyes in the exact opposite direction at the exact same speed. So if your head turns right at 100 degrees per second, your eyes turn left at 100 degrees per second. And the result? The image of the world stays perfectly locked and stable on your retina.
And the reason it's so ridiculously fast is because its wiring is incredibly short and efficient. It's what we call a 3-neuron arc. Neuron 1 goes from the canal to the brainstem. Neuron 2 is just a simple relay within the brainstem. And neuron 3 goes directly from the brainstem out to the eye muscles. That's it. It's one of the simplest, most direct pathways in the entire nervous system.
Just how fast are we talking? Well, the latency, that's the time from when your head starts to move to when your eyes move, is less than 10 milliseconds. To put that in perspective, a voluntary reaction, like hitting a button when you see a light, takes 100 to 200 milliseconds. The VOR is literally an order of magnitude faster, and it has to be, to keep up with how fast we naturally move our heads.
So the next time you're just walking down the street and the world around you looks perfectly clear and stable, you can thank this incredible system. Your semicircular canals are detecting every tiny rotation, and your vestibulo-ocular reflex is instantly canceling it out, all powered by one of the fastest, most elegant, and truly essential reflexes in the entire human body.
All right, let's continue our journey into the vestibular system. Now we're going to dive into the otolith organs. These are basically our built-in sensors for gravity and any kind of straight-line movement.
So we've talked about how we sense spinning and turning, right? But what about the other stuff? Like when you're accelerating in a car, or even just standing perfectly still and feeling the constant pull of gravity? Well, for that, your brain turns to a different set of tools, the otolith organs.
Deep inside your inner ear, you've got these two amazing little structures, the utricle and the saccule. You can almost think of them as your body's own personal accelerometers. They're constantly on, telling your brain which way is down and exactly how you're moving, as long as it's in a straight line. Now, these two don't do the exact same thing. They've got very specific jobs. It really all comes down to their orientation. You can see here the utricle is positioned on a horizontal plane. That makes it perfect for detecting forward and backward motion, like when you hit the gas in a car, or even side-to-side shuffling. The saccule, on the other hand, is oriented vertically, and that's why it's the one that picks up on up and down movements, like riding in an elevator, and of course that ever-present pull of gravity.
Okay, so how do they actually pull this off? Well, inside both the utricle and the saccule, there's a very special patch of cells called the macula. This is the sensor pad, if you will. It's ground zero, where the physical force of movement gets translated into a language your brain can actually understand.
So let's zoom in and build this macula from the ground up. At the very bottom, you have your hair cells. These are the primary sensory receptors. Lying on top of them is a gooey, gelatinous layer called the otolithic membrane. But the real stars of the show are embedded right on top of that membrane, tiny little crystals called the otoconia.
These otoconia are just microscopic crystals of calcium carbonate, but a much better and easier way to remember them is by their nickname, ear rocks. And yeah, it might sound a little silly, but the physical properties of these tiny rocks are absolutely essential for how your brain senses its place in the world.
So what's so special about these ear rocks? Well, it's their density. They clock in at about 2.7 grams per cubic centimeter, which means they are incredibly heavy for their tiny size. And trust me, This is not just some random fact. It is the absolute key to how this entire system works. You see, because the otoconia are so heavy, they make the entire membrane they're sitting on much, much heavier than the fluid surrounding it in the inner ear. And because of that weight, the membrane has a whole lot of inertia. It wants to stay put, and that makes it super sensitive to both the pull of gravity and any changes in motion.
Let's put all the pieces together and see how this generates a signal. So imagine your head tilts, or you accelerate forward. What happens? Well, that heavy otolithic membrane, because of its inertia, actually lags behind for a split second. This lag creates a shearing force, kind of dragging the membrane across the tops of the hair cells, which bends their little stereocilia. That bending action is the trigger. It opens up ion channels, the hair cells fire off a signal, and boom, a purely physical movement has just become a neural signal that your brain reads as motion. It's just a beautifully elegant mechanical system.
It's a really fascinating system, isn't it? Hey, if you're enjoying this deep dive in how our bodies work, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. We're always creating more of these custom medical explainers just for you.
So, we've just seen how this beautiful system is supposed to work, but what happens when it breaks?
We've got these tiny ear rocks, and they're meant to stay put on that membrane. So what happens if, for some reason, they break loose? Well, this leads us directly to one of the most common causes of vertigo out there, benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, or BPPV for short, and it's a purely mechanical problem. It causes these short but really intense episodes where you feel like the room is spinning, and it's almost always triggered by a simple change in your head's position. So where does it all start? It starts when a few of those otoconia crystals, those ear rocks, break free from the membrane in the utricle. Now this can happen for a few reasons, like getting older or maybe a knock to the head, but the result is the same. They become unmoored and start floating around where they absolutely do not belong.
Now, these rogue crystals don't just vanish. Gravity pulls them, and they often end up migrating into one of the nearby semicircular canals. And right there, that's the core of the problem. You have a piece of the system designed to sense straight line motion that has broken off and invaded the system designed to sense rotation.
This creates an incredible sensory mismatch. When the person moves their head, those loose crystals roll around inside the canal like marbles. This creates a current in the fluid that pushes on the cupola, sending a powerful but completely false signal to the brain that the head is spinning wildly. At the same time, your eyes and your body are screaming to the brain, "Nope, everything's still." This massive conflict is what triggers that intense feeling of vertigo. And the clinical signs of this are textbook. The vertigo itself is very brief, usually lasting less than a minute, because once you stop moving, the crystals settle down. It's also triggered by very specific movements, things like rolling over in bed or tilting your head back to look up. And because the brain thinks it's spinning, it often triggers involuntary, jerky eye movements called nystagmus, as it tries to stabilize a world that isn't actually moving. But here's the really cool part about BPV. Because it's a mechanical problem, it often has a simple mechanical solution. Treatments like the Epley maneuver are basically just a series of carefully planned head movements. The goal is to use gravity to gently guide those loose otoconia out of the semicircular canal and back into the utricle, where they can be reabsorbed and stop causing all that trouble. So, we'll end on this thought. If just a few microscopic ear rocks falling out of place can so powerfully and completely distort our entire perception of reality, it really makes you think, doesn't it? How stable is the world we experience every day, and how much do we rely on these fragile, incredibly precise systems working perfectly every single moment?